Hi guys, in response to a few people that have asked about the cooking and the food side of things and how to make things like the protein pancakes and just how I cook stuff in general. So I thought, well, let's do a version of budget kitchen because this is just a small, I'm in a bungalow at the moment, living at a friend's place. So we're in a tiny kitchen and the whole place is tiny, but there's not much room to move around in there, so excuse the clutter, but we can get a decent video out that shows how to make all this stuff in general. I'm by no means a professional cook, but you know, I can cook pretty reasonably, but yeah, it's not going to be like a Saturday morning kitchen or anything. So I'm going to start with making the lean protein meals. So that's things like the lean mince with the kimchi or the sauerkraut and the flavouring for the mince. So most of you would probably flavour like a lean meat with something like that, so like a Schwartz spice. The issue I've got with those is I don't like to consume too much salt. And if you're wondering why that is, I mean, A, salt's not great for you, but B, if you're trying to look good and you're trying to gauge how your physique is, consuming a lot of salt is actually a bad idea because it bloats you out. So you can hold like 2 to even 3 kilos of water weight in your body. That puts a lot of strain on your heart. Now, you know, if you're holding water weight, because when you take your socks off at night, you're going to see massive indents in your legs, and it's really even more common if you're overweight and you've got a lot of body fat, which I did at one point, and used to take my socks off at night when I was consuming like all the junk foods and the rubbish foods that have all got high salt content. You start to see that these massive indentations where your socks were or where your boots were around your ankles, and that's where the skin has got so much water underneath it that it's just gone back in and it's taking ages to kind of fill back out again. That's not good. It's putting strain on your heart, and for the purposes of aesthetics, if we're trying to look in the mirror and see how we're doing weight loss wise, a high salt diet is just going to keep us bloated out with all that water retention, and it's going to give you a kind of false impression. And if you want to lose weight real quick, then cut your salt levels down in your diet, because you'll drop like 2 kilos overnight. That's how fighters drop weight. They often drop it to maybe a level that you wouldn't want to go to, but certainly it pays to drop salt out of your diet. So the second ingredient in things like this is salt. Companies put it in there because salt tastes real nice. It's like makes things moreish. You know, that's why you can't stop going for the chips and dips and all that kind of thing, your Pringles and stuff. It's mainly the salt that gets people coming back for more. That's why bars put peanuts and crisps out for free. It's not because they're super charitable. It's because, number one, you'll keep going back for more, and number two, that's going to dry you out and make you want to drink loads, because the more salt you consume, the more you crave liquids to balance that out. So I make my own, and we'll go through these. It's a lot cheaper to make your own as well. So the main ingredient is smoked paprika. Then I've got garlic granules, couple of different types of chilies. The chipotle chilies are kind of smoky, and then I've got some habanero because I like it super hot, but chili flakes will be fine. A little bit of cumin, parsley, and oregano, or oregano if you're American. And then I just get a shaker, which that's for coffee really, but it'll do for what we're doing here. And I'm just going to mix some of these in. So this is the main ingredient, the smoked paprika. So I'm going to dump that whole thing in there. Sometimes you get a bit stuck in the bottom. Give it a knock. I'm going to go a little bit of oregano. As you can see, I'm not big on measurements, and it's all down to personal taste. I mean, you can have a look at those barbecue things and see how much of the sort of green leafy ingredients there are in there, the sort of ratio it is, but that's really down to personal choice. The only one I would be careful with is cumin, because that only needs a little dash. It's a very strong spice, and if you put a ton of that in, it makes it taste like you've sort of busted the doors open at an Indian restaurant or something. Habanero chili, again, that's pretty hot. I only had a little bit left in there, but I'll stick the whole thing in. I like hot spicy food, you might not. Garlic, again, personal taste. If you've got your date coming round for the evening, maybe you want to leave that out completely, and if you're on your own, then add plenty. I really like garlic, and I don't have a date coming round, so I'm not too worried. And that's it. So I've got my ingredients in there, and I'm just gonna take a fork, give it a stir around, and there we have our homemade barbecue seasoning with no salt, and it tastes nice and smoky because you get that from the if you use chipotle chilies, they're smoked, and the smoked paprika, obviously that gives it that nice smoky barbecue flavour. But the bottom line is you can use any sort of seasoning you want on your lean meat or fish. This is my favourite. If you've got a preference, now that if you don't want to mix it up and you don't want salt, I think there's a range called Mrs. Dash, D-A-S-H, and you can buy them online. They're in the same size pots as these. They're a lot cheaper in the States than they are in the UK, because I think that's where they come from. So if you're in the States, you might be able to find them at some of your, you know, like your version of a supermarket, your Walmarts and places like that, and you'll probably be able to get them at a decent price. When I bought them over here, they were like $4.99 a pot, so it's £5, and just for one of those spice pots, and it would probably do me like 4 or 5 meals. So that works out, you know, I don't really want to pay like nearly £1 a meal to just season my food. Whereas if I do it this way, I bought most of those spices in Aldi, which is a bargain price shop that we have over here. It's a bit like Lidl, and they were like 60p a pot, so they would probably make like 2 of those things if I bought an extra smoked paprika. So for about the same price, I'm getting like 2 giant containers of the seasoning rather than just one tiny little pot. Okay, so we get on to the meat part. I've got some 5% lean mince there, and I'll show you as I cook it. We're going to reduce the fat even further with that as well. So we're going to cook that in a pan, and I'm just going to use some olive oil. I always buy decent quality olive oil, and I'm just going to put enough in to just make the pan not stick. And olive oil, I always buy it in a bottle that's nice and dark, and I keep it in a sort of darkish place away from the window, because olive oil spoils really easily if you've got it like sunlight going into it and it gets really hot and stuff like that. So these dark bottles help because they stop UV from getting in there and making it go off. And then we're going to turn my hyper expensive oven on and just chuck this whole slab in there. All I'm going to be doing there is, as it cooks, I'm just going to be breaking it up into smaller pieces so it's nice and even, and that will cook down, and then I'll get the camera back rolling once that's browned off a bit, because what's going to happen, all the fat and stuff is going to accumulate at the bottom. And with these new, but I say new, with meat these days, you're always going to get this liquid content. You never used to get that with meat, but the supermarkets and all that bulk the stuff out. You know, they put the weight up by filling them full of liquid, so you get this horrible liquid in there, and then you get obviously the oil. So I'm going to show you that, and we're going to pour that off, so we just make this as lean as we possibly can. Okay, so we can see now the moisture in that, and I'm just going to use a spoon and I'm going to tip that away so that we haven't got a load of fat and moisture sat there. So there you can see we've got rid of all that fluid and fat, and now we're going to start adding the flavouring to it. So as it cooks, I'm just going to tip some this spice on. Just mixing it all around, making sure it's completely cooked off. We've got no raw bits in there, but this ensures it's all nicely coated, and most of all we got rid of all that horrible fluid, because that also will throw us off when we come to weigh it out, because if we want 80 or 100 grams or whatever we're weighing out of this per meal, then really you want to just be weighing out the weight of the meat. You do not want the weight of all that juice. If you've got one with a ton of juice in and then another that hasn't got any in, then you're going to get one that's, you know, way higher in protein value and one higher in fat value. So this way it's all the same. We're keeping the fat a little bit lower. There's still plenty of fat in this, there's fat in the meat, so you know, we haven't eradicated the benefits that we're going to get out of that fat, because as I explained before, you do need some fat like this for your hormones. You know, it's going to help cholesterol helps make testosterone, so it's vital, despite the fact that people say, you know, cholesterol is really bad for you. That there's a caveat to that, that if you have a level of cholesterol in your body and it suddenly started leaping up really high, which isn't particularly influenced by dietary cholesterol, that's influenced by a lot of factors including genetics, that's at the point that you want to start being concerned if you get big changes in cholesterol levels. Now, one of the things that they kind of got wrapped on the knuckles about in the medical side was that they tried to say that anyone with a cholesterol level of X was, you know, in danger of having a heart attack and they should be on so-and-so medication, and they found out the medications they were putting them on were not particularly good for them. And then they also found out that those arbitrary cholesterol levels weren't true for everyone. You know, that some people have always had naturally higher levels of cholesterol, and that doesn't necessarily put them at a greater risk of cardiovascular disease. It's the people that maybe had lower levels and then it jumped right up for no apparent reason. That is an indicative factor that there may be a problem, but it isn't necessarily a problem just by the fact that you happen to have high levels if you've always had them. So dietary cholesterol received a big old battering in the press and stuff, but it isn't the demon that people make it out to be, and there's certainly nothing wrong with eating a decent amount of reasonable quality red meat. So that's cooked off now. We're just going to let that cool at the side. So we've got our mince, it's all cooked, smells amazing, nice and barbecuey, really good. And then just got a set of digital scales there. They're bigger size digital scales that we can weigh out these portions on. And then I've got these mini scales. I look like a drug dealer with those, but that's not covered in drugs, that's protein powder. And I use those to weigh out my protein and stuff like that, if I've got any small bits to weigh out. And normally, like things like if I've got supplements like creatine and I want to have 5 grams of creatine, or you've got a pre-workout shake and it says take 8.6 grams, that's a good way of doing it, because the scoops are always way out on those. So with these, just put your tubs on, zero the scales. So we've got all of our meat there, and then we're just going to weigh out into batches. Like so. And then just keep going until you've got all your Tupperwares ready. Fridge those and then eat them as you need them. We got all our stuff tubbed up in the fridge, and then when we come to mix it around, I just add things like this. So one of the members, one of the viewers, suggested this the other day. I had been buying some stuff from Tesco, Biona brand, and he said, you know, that wasn't the best way to go for sauerkraut. The reason I like sauerkraut and kimchi is they're really good for your gut. They help with your gut flora, and they populate it with healthy bacteria. And if you're eating a lot of protein and a lot of health foods and fibre, you need to do everything you can for your gut, because you do not want to start having tons of protein and then not have a healthy gut, because your partner will not thank you for that. And generally this stuff is just good all round. And if you watch the Huberman podcast, Andrew Huberman, he's had people on there that, you know, there's a lot of science now that backs having a really good biome in the gut, because that impacts your hormone levels, it impacts all sorts of things like strength, it impacts your immune system, and they're starting to learn more and more about how important that is. So I got this stuff from a Polish shop, like a little Polish supermarket, and you get a really good sized bag, 500 grams. It's called Kapuska Kizona. Sorry Polish people, the pronunciation I'm sure was terrible, but it's, you can see it on there, ignore my pronunciation. And that was like £1.20 for that whole great big bag, and it's the stuff, it hasn't been ruined with heat treatment and all that kind of thing, so you're getting all the good fermented bacteria in there. And then if I can, I buy some kimchi, which is generally a bit more expensive. If you're lucky enough to live near a Korean supermarket or something like that, you can actually find it at a decent price in there. If you have to buy it from a normal supermarket, they always charge you a little bit too much for it, in my opinion. But I really like kimchi, I just like the flavour. But either of these are good to mix around. And then I'll probably add some pickled beetroot or some pickled gherkin. I like adding pickled beetroot because that's been shown to have really decent benefit to things like your blood pressure. And that's another thing I like to try and keep on top of as I get older. One of the driving factors for me eating healthy in the first place was I started to notice my blood pressure was a little bit higher than it ever had been. It wasn't massively high, but high enough to kind of concern me a bit. So I just wanted to drop that down with a healthy diet, eradicate the salt. That helped a lot. And then add some of these things here, and it's back to normal again. So next we'll go on to the protein pancakes, and we'll see how we get on with those. Okay, so now we're on to our protein pancakes, and these are savoury pancakes. The reason we have them is because obviously we want the protein from the eggs, a bit of fat from the eggs, no problem with that, but we're generally having these after workout, so I want some carbohydrates in there as well. If we just had an omelette, we'd just be getting protein and fat. And if you want to sub that out for one of your lean protein meals, if you don't want to eat a ton of meat or fish, then you could have an omelette instead, and that's just fine. 3 eggs just as an omelette, and have a bit of seasoning on that, however you take those. But I prefer to have these protein pancakes. If you don't want to make the protein pancakes and you want a protein carb meal utilising eggs, go and get yourself some really high quality, decent whole grain bread. Make sure the first ingredient is wholemeal flour, because a lot of the brown breads and the whole grain breads, they look like that, but when you actually read the ingredients, they're just using normal white flour as the first ingredient. You want the first ingredient to be wholemeal flour, and it to be ideally a properly cooked, not some supermarket junk, but try and buy it from a bakery. And if you have that, have 2 pieces of that toast with, say, 3 eggs scrambled, and that's a pretty good protein carb meal for after a workout. I prefer to do it this way just because I try and avoid bread. I don't really get on well with gluten. It doesn't do my stomach much good. That's just a personal issue for me. But also, I don't like having bread in the house because it's too much of a temptation, and we're getting back to that you know, convenience thing again. If you've got a loaf of bread sitting around and it catches your eye, you're like, oh, I could stick a couple of bits of cheese in there and that would be a real easy meal to eat, and then your next thing you know, you're stuffing your face with cheese sandwiches. So I just don't have bread sitting around, to be honest. Okay, so eggs, we're gonna mix up 3 eggs. So we're just gonna break these into a bowl, mix them around. Grab ourselves a fork. I'm just going to mix them up like so. And then we're going to take some of the spice mixture that we made earlier, and I'm going to add that in there just to give it a nice savoury barbecue flavour. You can blend that into them. Then I'm going to take my food mixer. So this is a Ninja food mixer. You can see I've done some oats in there already, but all we're going to do here is grab some oatmeal. So that's just standard rolled oats in there, and then a heaped scoop of this, just using a protein scoop to give myself a heaped serving, which is about 50 grams because I've checked the weight on that already. Stick it in there and blend it up. Now you can also buy powdered oats. They're a lot more expensive, so this just saves you a bit of money, but you do also need a blender that's capable of it. Some of the blenders are like they've got really sharp choppy blades. This Ninja blender and some of the other more expensive blenders, they literally pound the stuff into oblivion. So that's the kind of blender you want for making powdered oats. I'll just get that done. So we've got our powdered oats in there, blended them down nicely, and we're just going to add those to the egg mixture like so. Then I'm going to blend that up. It's a bit goopy at first, but it'll soon mix up together. Got to give it a good old stir to get all the lumps out of it. And there you have it. We now got the blended up mixture of the oats and the eggs and the seasoning. Then it's just a matter of putting the pan on. Take a bit of olive oil. That's the old bottle. A bit in the bottom of the pan to stop it sticking. You could use rapeseed oil or something along those lines. Wait for that to heat up. So we've got our pan of hot oil and the budget price hob. The hob's budget price, the energy that uses to power the hob, is not budget price at the moment. That is super expensive. So, thanks UK government for that. And we're just going to add that in there. Chuck that in the sink. Leave this for a couple of minutes. I'll come back to it in 2 minutes and I'll show you the sort of consistency we want before we start trying to turn him over. Okay, so we got to this stage after a couple of minutes and you can see he's starting to firm up, but we need to turn him over. So just going to use a spatula and then flip him like so. Nice and brown on that side, but we want to make sure it's evenly cooked. So back down again for about a minute or so. So we've now been cooking that on the opposite side for a couple of minutes. You can see now evenly cooked. It's ready to go. You can turn the hob off and then generally I just cut him into quarters and that's ready to go. One savoury protein pancake. I normally have it with some salad leaves or kimchi sprinkled over the top and a bit of balsamic vinegar dribbled on it. Beautiful. If you can hear any unusual noises, I've got my little dog down here. I'll show you him if you like. Say hello, Corky. You being a good boy? You being a good boy? He's hungry. He's begging for food. You want foodies from Dada, don't you? Yeah, I know. Oh dear. As you can see, my dog is begging. He's down here, so any noises, that's why. It's not me, I promise.